Thank you for joining me today. My name's Scott. I'm going to talk about musical steganography, otherwise known as hiding things in music. Be a little bit of a history lesson. We're going to take a look at some history and then also some demos, which are always fraught with peril since they're live. So this should be interesting. All right, so what is steganography? Well, we can look that up in the dictionary, and a dictionary definition would be the art or practice of concealing a message, image, or file within another message, image, or file. So essentially hiding something in something else. These days we tend to think of this in digital terms, but there's a long history of physical steganography as well. This guy pictured here, his name's Herodotus. Around 440 BC, he wrote a book called Histories, and in it he recounts two different instances of physical steganography. In the first, he talks about a general who needed to send a message over to a different city. So he found a soldier, shaved his head, wrote the message on his head, and apparently might have been tattooed on his head, and waited for the hair to grow back. Then he sent the soldier off and said, hey, find this guy, tell him to shave your head, and then he'll be able to see the message. So not really the most efficient means of sending a secret message, but you know, it'll work. The second instance of physical steganography he talks about is using wax tablets. And back in those days, a wax tablet was a thin piece of wood, and then wax spread on top of it, and you'd write on the wax. But to hide a message in that, you would simply write the message on the wood instead, put the wax on top, and pretend it's just a regular writing instrument. And whoever is expecting the message would have to know to scrape the wax off in order to read the message. So as you can see, the statues still look pretty similar. But this guy is Johannes Trithemius. He was a German Benedictine abbot. He didn't start out as an abbot, though. He got caught in some bad weather going from his university back to his hometown, and he took shelter at a monastery. And he's like, well, I think I'll stay here. Seemed like a cozy place. So he ended up being elected abbot after a short time, and he transformed the place into a center of education. So he's considered a polymath. He's also an occultist, and you'll see occultist is an interesting theme here. And he wrote a lot of different books. In 1499, he wrote a book called Steganographia. So you'd wonder what that was about. Well, if you read the text, it appears to be about angels and magic. But around the year 1600, somebody published what was purported to be a key to the Steganographia. And sure enough, it really was a key. If you use that with the text of the book, it actually turns out to be a book about steganography and cryptography. So quite the unique usage of angels and magic there. 20 years after that, he wrote a book called Polygraphia, and that's pictured on this slide. It's pages and pages and pages of over 1,000 different alphabets and tables with symbols. And he wrote this as a way to give people the ability to create their own ciphers. Also in the book, he published his own cipher, and it's now called the Trithemius cipher. So it's been around a really, really long time. We could find other instances to recount here, but we don't really have the time to do that. What we want to do is talk about musical steganography. So how can we hide messages in music? This is a very non-exhaustive list. We can use substitution ciphers, backmasking, we can hide images in the audio, we can manipulate frequency and amplitude. We can even do echo manipulation, so manipulation of reverb. Some are harder to do than others, and we certainly don't have enough time in this talk to talk about everything. So I'm going to pick a few to talk about and demo. Substitution ciphers. This is a huge, huge subject. So in the late 1400s, there is a very famous French Renaissance composer named Josquin des Prés, and he was very famous for writing masses. And so he wrote a mass for the Duke of Ferrara, And the really interesting thing about this was the technique he used to create the cantus firmus of the Mass. It's the musical theme. He used a technique called soggetto cavato. And what that means is that he chose some words, split the words up into different syllables, and the words he chose were Hercule du Ferrarier, and I apologize, I do not speak French, so I hope that sounded okay. And you take the vowel sounds of each of those syllables and you match them up with solmization syllables. Now, solmization syllables we know as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Back in those days, they did not use do, they used ut. So when you match up the syllables of his chosen words with the solmization syllables, you get re, ut, re, fa, mi, re, which are the notes D, C, D, C, D, F, E, D. And it sounds a little bit like this. So no one really knew exactly what the songs meant as far as the musical theme, but it actually came out of the name of the Duke of Ferrara. Around the year 1600, we learn two very interesting things. We learn that the Pope has his own cryptography service, which I had no idea, and is actually quite neat. And that cryptography service employed standard forms of cryptography as well as musical cryptography. So they used a cipher that contained 9 different pitches. They used 8 different variations for each pitch, and that gave them 72 symbols to cipher messages. And these are actual written symbols. They would write music and made it look like sheet music, transport it from place to place, and those would be their secret messages. In the late 1700s, there's a guy named Philip Thicknesse. He was known as an eccentric. He had a really long military career, and he traveled all over the world as part of the military. So he wrote a bunch of books about his travels. And in 1772, instead of writing a book about his travels, he wrote a book about cryptography instead. And it's called A Treatise on the Art of Deciphering and of Writing in Cipher with an Harmonic Alphabet, which is a very, very long title. But the book is actually pretty neat, and you can find this as scans on Google Books. And it talks about a number of different ways to encipher and decipher messages. But the really cool thing is this harmonic alphabet that he created. And you can see that. It's probably kind of hard to read on this screen on the right-hand side. So he actually shows different notes on a staff and the letters that equate to those notes underneath it, and also an example at the bottom of the page. And he thought about this a bit, and he wrote about music masters. And these should be individuals who are well learned in creating music. They would memorize the harmonic alphabet, and they can talk to each other in real time just by playing music at one another. So that would be fantastic if a pair of people could really do that. That would be amazing. And then he thought a little bit further, and he tried to come up with a way to kind of throw people off the scent. If you had a clue that, maybe this is just a substitution cipher and there's a message encoded in here, he says, let's add some grace notes to the music as well. And grace notes are very, very short little notes that are just kind of tossed in from time to time to make the music sound interesting. But it could throw somebody off if they're trying to decode the message. In 1808, a biography about Michael Haydn was published. He's the slightly less famous brother of Franz Joseph Haydn, although he was an accomplished composer in his own right. He created his own musical cipher as well. And it's somewhat simplistic. It's just an increasing range of notes, starting with a low G on the bass clef. But it points to the fact that there are a number of composers right around the same time that were really, really interested in combining music and cryptography and figuring out how to send secret messages through their compositions. but a lot of it was about the composers having fun. It was common for composers to use their own names as motifs in the music they created. They'd use names of loved ones. They'd even take names of cities that were important to them and put those in their music as well. So at this point in time, there were really two main methods that they would use to do this. And the first method is the German method. And it's pretty simple. You take the notes A through G, and those would be the letters A through G. The only exception to that is B natural was used for H, and B flat was used for B. E flat was S, and A flat was the combination of A and S. So that gave them about 10 letters to work with, which isn't a whole lot, but you could still have some fun with it. So Bach used his name all over the place in his compositions. And using the German method of encoding, that would be a B flat, an A C, and a B natural. So here's an example from the Art of Fugue in which he incorporated his name into the music. Oh, well, we'll try that again, huh? Come on, you can do it. There we go. All right. Schumann also used his name a lot. He abbreviated his name SCHA because there was no other possible way. There was no U or M or N that he could actually use with the German method of encoding. So he created a piece called Carnival, and the interesting thing about that was that piece was split into 22 different sections, and in each section he would either use his name or the word Ash, for Ash Wednesday. Ash also stood for the city that his then fiancée was born in. And he would kind of mix them up and tweak the notes a bit into different octaves. And he'd use those across all 22 sections of the music. And right in the middle, he actually wrote out and published as part of the piece a kind of a key to the cryptograms that he put into the music. It wasn't meant to be played as part of the entire composition, but some players actually did record it, and this is what that middle section sounds like. So the interesting thing is if you had no idea, you wouldn't even be able to tell necessarily that they were trying to communicate any kind of message, and that was the kind of the point in doing this, is they're having fun putting little messages in the music that 99% of the people listening would never get. So even with limited letters, we can still have a little bit of fun with this. We can encode words like beef or cabbage or cash or cage. So we can express our interest in buying a lot of beef and cabbage, I guess, in a composition of our own choosing. So here's where I'll show you a little demo. This portion will be in Haskell. It's a language called TidalCycles, which is built in Haskell. And TidalCycles is about creating patterns, and patterns are really magical. They look like strings. They're really pattern objects and functors in the Haskell language. So we can apply functions to the pattern and have some fun with it. And making a substitution cipher actually turns out to be fairly easy. We need to create a function that will return the substitutions between letter and note. And then we need to map that substitution function over some plain text that we wish to encode. All right, so here we go. So you'll see a lot of the lines look sort of like this. D1 simply specifies an output, so we don't have to worry about that so much. But the interesting parts here is that we always have to specify an N. This tells TidalCycles what notes to play, and it just looks like a string. We give it a note letter and an octave, separate everything by spaces. We also always have to have an S, and the string after an S is the name of a synth to use in the underlying synth software. So this should just give us 4 notes. There we go. And its name is TidalCycles. It loops, so it doesn't just stop playing for you. So we need some utility functions to make this work. We have a function called insert space. When we actually convert plain text to encoded text, it comes back in an array. So as you saw above here, every note has to have a space in between. So we have a function to put those spaces in between. And then we also need a function that will take that array, turn it back to a string, and then convert it back into a TidalCycles pattern so that it can play it. So with those, we define some very simple substitution functions. So this one here is called gconv, and you can see that I'm mapping A, B, C, and so on to the correct notes that we want to play. So A3, BF3, and so on and so forth. All right, and so when we want to actually convert some text, we simply say map, use the mapping function, gconv, and then the string of text that we're converting, and use the array to pattern function to turn it back into a pattern, and give that all to n. And now we get Bach. And Schumann. And everyone's favorite beef. And of course cash, because we got to pay for the beef. All right. So looking at the second method here, it's called the French method. And using this method, we can actually encode all the letters of the alphabet. So at the very top of this table here, the letters A through G correspond to the notes A through G again. And then all the other letters are placed into the grid alphabetically. And so in order to figure out what note to use for a specific letter, we just look vertically. And so we find out that the note C is the encoding for the letters C, J, Q, and X. Now, on one hand, this is really awesome because now we can encode any English letter. On the downside, though, this makes it really, really hard for somebody to make sense of the message you're sending them, because they'll see a string of notes and they'll see a C, and they'll have absolutely no idea if that's supposed to be a C, a J, a Q, or an X. So you'd have to apply a second level of cryptanalysis to the whole thing to work out letter frequency and see if you can make that work. And that's just extra work that no one wants to do. But I'm happy because now I can encode my whole name, and it's this whole string below, and I can play that for you. So here again, I just created a French method substitution function that goes through all the letters of the alphabet. And it lets me do this. It's a catchy tune. I kind of like my name. Yeah, I think I'll keep it. So moving a little bit further in time, getting to more modern days, there were other composers who really like to play with ciphers and music and how they can mix the two together. Ravel, Debussy, and Messiaen also played around with this. And instead of doing like one-to-one substitutions, they wanted to get a little more complex with it, mostly to make it sound better, because The German method and the French method, while it worked, it didn't necessarily create full compositions that sound like really, how they wanted it to sound like. So Messiaen in particular did some cool stuff, and this really, really blurry set of notes that you see on the slide, and unfortunately that's the best I could find. This is the substitution cipher that he used when creating his composition meditations. And he actually used this to encode quotations from Thomas Aquinas. And the cool thing is that the cipher that he uses actually fits his musical style pretty well. And here's a little snippet. So that's actually been analyzed many times, and it really does include quotations, and you can find those out on the internet. So we can pretty easily create our own cipher using these same methods. It's really a matter of just creating that substitution function. So I'll play some music using our own substitution cipher. And I'm going to use a program called ScoreCloud to attempt to generate a score from the music, because it's one thing to play encoded music, it's another thing to actually try to decode it. So let's see how that goes. I'm going to start the music. Let's get to the right place. This is a very simple substitution function. It's just increasing notes. So it'll be Hello Strange Loop 2018. And we'll let this record. Okay. So we recorded some audio, we'll hit analyze, and came up with far fewer notes than I thought it would, but that's okay. So this is kind of what it does, and that's probably, let's see if I can get that a little bit bigger. There we go. So ScoreCloud actually does a pretty decent job of taking audio and converting it into the correct pitches. Where it seems to fail is being really consistent on getting the timing right and the duration of the notes right. But for the purposes of decoding the music, where we're doing a strict note to letter substitution, that's probably an okay thing. I will show this one though. So this is from a recording of the Bach in the German method that I played earlier, and it actually does a pretty good job. And so this is actually a B flat, that is an A, that's a C. And that is a B natural, which are the notes that it should translate into. So software such as this can be used in limited ways to decode music for us. So we can think about making this even more complex. So creating ciphers that encode multiple notes per letter, maybe something that only encodes every nth note for a letter instead of every single note. We can also manipulate pitches and detune pitches and change note lengths to encode letters as well. So that's enough about substitution ciphers. It's a really huge subject and brings in all kinds of stuff about cryptography. But let's look into backmasking a bit. So we'll transport ourselves to the near past. So this would be the 50s and 60s, a fun and exciting time for rock music. But actually, we really want to go back to the year 1877, because that's kind of where it all started. This dapper-looking gentleman sitting by that weird piece of equipment is Thomas Edison. He invented the phonograph. It doesn't look quite like our record players of today, but it works very similarly. And to the surprise of no one, he and others working on the phonograph immediately tried to figure out what happens if we try to play things in reverse. So they have started a trend. A trend continued by this interesting looking guy. His name's Aleister Crowley. He was a well-known occultist. Here we have the occult coming up again. And he was an odd duck. He was possibly also a British spy, which was interesting. But his claim to fame is that he claims that he was on his honeymoon and was visited by a disembodied voice. And this voice dictated to him the Book of Law, which he used as the basis for a religion that he founded called Thelema. And it's all about practicing magic. So he wrote a slew of books for his religion, one of which was called Magic Book 4 in the early 1900s, and it was a long treatise on magic. And what he wanted his practitioners to do was to think backwards by external means in order to train themselves. And he specifically said that you should listen to records backwards in order to do this. So it's kind of a weird and interesting link there. The Musique Concrete movement would use small bits of audio and kind of sprinkle them around and rearrange them to create interesting sound collage. Most of that work was done on record players. But in the 50s, the 1950s this time, tape recorders became widely available. So this allowed people to get even tinier and tinier bits of music to make collages with. But the most important things is that it allowed people to easily manipulate speed of audio playback and easily reverse the audio as well. So coming out of that, a little-known band called the Beatles, in 1966, they were recording their album Revolver. And John Lennon recollected that he was under the influence of marijuana and decided to play some of the tapes backwards. He thought it was pretty cool, brought it to the rest of the band, and they liked it as well. Their producer had a completely different story and said, no, the whole band was doing that the whole time. They all thought it was great. I don't know which is the correct recollection, but their song Rain was the first recorded song with backwards audio built into the song. And that, here's a little snippet of that. All right, so you kind of hear the backwards music in there. It has a really distinct sound when you hear something backwards. So that kind of kicked off this big thing where people would look for audio that was backwards in every song. And so things happen like this. Here's another Beatles song, I'm So Tired. Play that again. It's really hard to hear. So that was reversing that audio. Purportedly it says Paul is a Ted man, miss him, miss him, miss him. But that's completely unintentional. It's just a recording artifact. It never happened. But people found things like this all over the place. And this caused some problems. Big controversy. There are so many false positives that there were congressional hearings about this. The PMRC got involved. Many people are saying rock bands are in league with Satan. People kept hearing Satan all over the place. So there's a couple of clips here that have unintentional backmasking. Stairway to Heaven. Queen's another one, Bites the Dust. And then because of all the controversy, some bands decided to deliberately put things into their music, like Pink Floyd, Slayer, and even the Electric Light Orchestra. So in a Stairway to Heaven's kind of interesting.
If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alone there.
All right, that's forwards, and here's what it is in reverse. So human brains have this amazing ability to find pattern where there might not really be any pattern, and this is one of those cases. It does not really say, oh, here's to my sweet Satan. It really doesn't. Pink Floyd, however, did this on purpose. And then in reverse.
We have just discovered the secret message. Please.
So we have discovered the secret message, which is good, because we like secret messages in our songs. All right, so this is actually really easy to do in TidalCycles. There's a speed parameter, and if you set it to -1, it will play the sample in reverse. So, somewhere here, yeah, here it is. I recorded a sample for you. All right. All right, so Past Scott created that. And I have it loaded into Audacity. I put some background music in there. And if I reverse that and play it.
I hope you're having a good time. I hope you're having a good time.
Yeah, all right. I hope you're having a good time too. Past Scott was so prophetic. So backmasking is fun and pretty easy to do in the TidalCycle software. All right, so pictures. We can hide pictures in music too. All right, so in 1999, a little-known techno artist named Aphex Twin released an EP called Window Licker. It was a pretty catchy tune, had a memorable video for those who have seen it. But a couple years later, some people out in internet land decided to extract all the audio off the EP and run it through a spectrum analyzer. And specifically, somebody pointed to track 2 of the EP. It didn't have a traditional name. Its name was this giant equation. So near the end of the track, if you look at the spectrum analysis, it looks like this. Or it goes forward. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So if you've just been scanning and watching this go across your screen and then you see that, you'd be like, what in the world? So Aphex Twin has a certain sense of humor. He deliberately put that in his song. He actually put other designs in some of his other songs as well, but this is really the most memorable one. So that's pretty cool. Other groups did that as well. Venetian Snares put some nice pictures of cats in their songs. And even 9 Inch Nails, and I have absolutely no idea what that is, but it looks kind of cool. All right, so how do you do that? So on the Mac, there's this really neat bit of software called Metasynth that can be used to do this. On Windows, there is a less neat piece of software called Coagula. You'll need some sort of audio editor to merge things together, and a bit of software called Sonic Visualizer can be used to do the spectrum analysis. So I'll just say about Metasynth, it's really cool, but it's not free, unfortunately, and it's quite expensive, or at least I thought it was expensive. And unfortunately, the demo can't export audio, so my demo does not show Metasynth. It does show Coagula. So if hopefully we have, oh, it powered off. This doesn't take too long, so I'll get this going, and this is the fun of the live demo here. All right. We'll go back to the slides. So basically, you can import an image into Coagula as a bitmap. Coagula can export WAV files for your image, and we'll merge that together with whatever song we want using Audacity into a single audio file, and then we'll import the result into Sonic Visualizer, and we'll see the results. So let's see how we're doing here. Oh, there we go. All right. Get this going here. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Come on. Oh, okay. Well, that was the wrong thing, but all right, here we go. All right. It's all in a day's work. All right. We'll open an image, and I did try this 2 ways with my face and also with high strange loop. This is actually easier to see, so I'll use this. So it's pretty easy. You open the image, you ask it to render. It sounds horrible, right? So it's actually taking the colors and the location of the different colors in the image and converting that to audio, and it sounds bad. So just like Aphex Twin's face sounded horrible, high strange loop, I'm sorry, sounds horrible. So we'll go ahead and we'll see. Oh, I don't need to save that. So I pre-imported all this into Audacity, and so the top one here is the strange loop image, and the bottom part is some actual music. And then we get real music. So this has already been exported into a file for us, and we'll go ahead and open that up. All right, so there's our file. And Sonic Visualizer is pretty cool. We can add a spectrogram, and we'll change that to make it a little easier to see. And we can zoom in a bit, and there is our image and our music. So it's really actually not too hard to go ahead and hide whatever cool stuff you want in your music. The hard part is putting it in a place where no one will notice that it sounds horrible. Because it does. All right, so music and steganography are a lot of fun. What I've shown today is really only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of different techniques that you can use to hide your own messages in audio files. So really the sky's the limit here. You can get really, really creative with this. Special thanks to Alex McLean, who created TidalCycles. Both him and an acquaintance, Ben Gold, helped me out with some of the initial sample code to make this all work. And that's all I got. Thank you very much for listening.